For as long as she could remember, Emily had always been curious about her family's past. Growing up, she would often ask her parents and grandparents about their lives before she was born, but they would always brush off her questions with vague answers. Despite their evasiveness, Emily sensed that there was more to their stories than what they were telling her. It wasn't until Emily's grandmother passed away that she finally got a glimpse into her family's troubled past. While going through her grandmother's belongings, Emily stumbled upon a dusty old box filled with photographs, letters, and other memorabilia. As she sifted through the items, Emily discovered that her family's history was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. One photograph in particular caught her attention. It was a faded black and white picture of her great-grandmother, who Emily had never met. On the back of the photo, there was a handwritten note that read, "She was taken by the devil." Emily couldn't believe what she was reading. Was her family involved in some kind of demonic cult? She knew that she had to dig deeper to uncover the truth. Over the next few weeks, Emily spent every spare moment researching her family's history. She scoured old newspaper archives, combed through genealogy records, and even hired a private investigator to help her uncover the truth. The more she learned, the more she realized just how troubled her family's past really was. She discovered that her great-grandmother had been involved in a secretive cult that worshipped a demonic entity known as the Black Goat. The cult had been responsible for a string of disappearances and murders in their small town before finally being disbanded by the authorities. As Emily delved deeper into her family's history, she began to experience strange occurrences in her own life. She would hear strange whispers in her ear when she was alone, and she started having vivid nightmares about her great-grandmother and the demonic cult. At first, Emily dismissed these experiences as nothing more than her imagination running wild. But as the occurrences became more frequent and intense, she began to fear that she was opening herself up to some kind of demonic possession. Despite her growing fear, Emily couldn't stop herself from uncovering more about her family's past. She knew that she had to confront the dark secrets that had been buried for so long, no matter the cost. Little did she know that her journey into her family's troubled past would lead her down a path of horror and terror beyond her wildest nightmares. As Emily continued her research into her family's past, strange things began to happen around her. It started with small things like objects moving on their own or doors creaking open in the middle of the night. Emily initially dismissed these occurrences as her imagination or simple coincidences, but as they continued to happen, she could no longer ignore them. One night, while she was reading through old family letters, Emily felt a cold breeze brush past her. She shivered and looked up, but there was no window or door open. Suddenly, she felt a hand brush past her face, and a voice whispered her name. Emily jumped up, knocking over the stack of letters in front of her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she was covered in a cold sweat. She knew then that something was seriously wrong. Over the next few days, Emily experienced more unexplainable occurrences. Objects would move or disappear, and she began to hear strange whispers in her ear. She also started having vivid nightmares that felt so real she could feel the breath of a demonic presence on her neck. One night, Emily woke up to find her room filled with a thick fog that seemed to be swirling around her bed. She tried to get up, but she felt like she was being held down by an unseen force. She was terrified, but she couldn't scream or even move. As the fog cleared, Emily saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure seemed to be made of darkness and smoke, and she could feel its malevolent presence seeping into her skin. She could feel its anger, its hunger, and its hatred, and she knew that it was something far beyond her understanding. Emily closed her eyes and tried to block out the presence, but she could feel it getting stronger. Suddenly, she heard a voice in her mind, a voice that was not her own. "You cannot escape me, Emily," the voice whispered. "You are mine now." Emily opened her eyes, and the figure was gone. She was alone in her room, but she knew that she was no longer alone in her mind. She had unwittingly opened herself up to a demonic possession, and there was no going back. Emily knew that she had to do something before it was too late. She tried to ignore the occurrences, but they only grew more intense. She began to seek help from anyone who would listen, but most people dismissed her as simply being paranoid or delusional. Despite the skepticism of others, Emily refused to give up. She continued to research her family's past and the demonic entity that had possessed her great-grandmother. She began to learn more about the rituals and spells that had been used to summon the demon, and she started to understand the danger that she was in. Emily knew that she had to find a way to break the possession and free herself from the demon's grasp. But she also knew that she was running out of time, and that the demon was growing stronger with each passing day. She would have to be brave and resourceful if she was going to survive the horrors that awaited her. Emily's search for the truth about her family's troubled past continued, leading her down a path of darkness and horror. She spent hours poring over old family records and documents, trying to piece together the events that had led to the demonic possession of her great-grandmother. The more she learned, the more disturbed she became. She discovered that her family had a long history of dabbling in the occult and practicing dark magic. They had been obsessed with the idea of gaining power and immortality, and had made deals with demons and other malevolent entities in order to achieve their goals. As Emily delved deeper into her family's past, she began to uncover secrets that had been hidden for generations. She discovered that her great-grandmother had not been the only one to be possessed by a demon. In fact, several members of her family had been possessed over the years, and many of them had died under mysterious circumstances. Emily's research also led her to a book of ancient spells and incantations that had been passed down through her family for generations. She was horrified to find that the book contained instructions for summoning demons and other evil entities, as well as spells for binding and controlling them. As Emily continued to read through the book, she began to feel as though she was being watched. She looked up and saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, watching her with glowing red eyes. Emily tried to run, but she found that she was paralyzed with fear. The figure stepped closer, and she could feel its malevolent presence seeping into her skin. She could hear its voice in her mind, whispering dark secrets and promising power beyond her wildest dreams. Emily knew that she had to fight back. She closed her eyes and focused all her willpower on banishing the demon from her mind. She recited a protection spell that she had learned from one of her family's old grimoires, and felt a surge of energy flow through her body. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone. Emily was alone, but she knew that the danger was far from over. As she continued her research, Emily began to experience more supernatural occurrences. She heard whispers in the dark, and felt cold fingers brush past her face. She saw visions of ancient rituals and demonic entities, and felt the pull of dark magic tugging at her soul. Despite the danger, Emily refused to give up. She knew that she had to uncover the truth about her family's past, no matter the cost. She continued to study the ancient tomes and grimoires, and began to learn the dark secrets of her family's magic. But the more she learned, the more she realized that she was in over her head. She had unwittingly opened herself up to a world of darkness and horror, and she didn't know if she could survive the consequences of her actions. As Emily continued her research into her family's troubled past, she began to feel as though she was being watched at all times. She could feel a malevolent presence lurking just beyond the edge of her vision, waiting to strike. One night, as she was sleeping, she felt something cold and clammy wrap around her ankle. She tried to kick it off, but it was too strong. She felt it pull her towards the edge of the bed, and then suddenly she was on the floor. She looked up and saw a dark figure standing over her, its eyes glowing red. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She could feel the demon's presence inside her, taking control of her body. Emily was now possessed, and she felt as though she was no longer in control of her own actions. She found herself doing things that she would never normally do, such as hurting herself and others. She began to hear voices in her head, urging her to commit acts of violence and chaos. She saw visions of demonic entities and ancient rituals, and felt herself becoming more and more disconnected from reality. Emily knew that she had to fight back against the possession, but she didn't know how. She reached out to a local priest for help, but he refused to believe her story. She tried to find a witch or sorcerer who could help her, but all of them were either afraid of her or were themselves possessed. In her desperation, Emily turned to the same dark magic that had possessed her great-grandmother so many years ago. She began to perform the same rituals and spells that her ancestors had used to control demons and other malevolent entities. As she delved deeper into the dark arts, Emily felt herself becoming more and more powerful. She could feel the demon's presence within her growing stronger with each passing day. She began to revel in the chaos and destruction that she was causing, and began to see herself as a being of immense power and darkness. But as Emily continued down this path, she began to realize the true cost of her actions. She saw the pain and suffering that she was causing to those around her, and began to feel a sense of guilt and remorse. She knew that she had to find a way to banish the demon from her body before it was too late. With the help of an old grimoire, Emily began to perform a ritual that would banish the demon from her body once and for all. It was a dangerous and complex ritual, but Emily was determined to see it through to the end. As she performed the ritual, Emily could feel the demon's presence growing weaker and weaker. She felt a sense of relief and triumph as the demon was finally banished from her body. But Emily knew that her journey was far from over. She had been through a harrowing experience, and had seen firsthand the true horror of dark magic and demonic possession. She knew that she would never be the same again, but she was determined to move forward and try to make amends for the pain and suffering that she had caused. With the demon finally banished from her body, Emily was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had seen the true horror of demonic possession, and knew that she could never go back to the way things were before. She decided to take a break from her research into her family's past, and instead focus on healing and finding a way to make amends for the pain and suffering that she had caused. She sought out therapy and spiritual guidance, and slowly began to rebuild her shattered psyche. As Emily worked on healing herself, she also began to reach out to those who had been hurt by her actions. She apologized to her friends and family for the things that she had done while under the demon's control, and tried to make amends for the pain that she had caused. She also began to work with local charities and organizations to help those who had been affected by dark magic and demonic possession. She used her own experience as a cautionary tale, warning others about the dangers of dabbling in the dark arts. Through her work and her dedication to healing and redemption, Emily began to find a sense of peace and purpose that she had never felt before. She realized that she had a responsibility to use her experiences to help others, and to make sure that no one else had to go through the same pain and suffering that she had. As she continued on her journey, Emily also began to revisit her family's troubled past. But this time, she approached it with a new perspective and a newfound strength. She realized that by confronting the past head-on, she could help to break the cycle of pain and suffering that had haunted her family for generations. Emily spent months researching her family's history, digging through old records and documents, and talking to those who knew her ancestors. She uncovered a wealth of information about her family's involvement in dark magic and demonic possession, and began to piece together a narrative that explained much of what had happened to her and her family. She realized that her great-grandmother had not been evil, but rather had been a victim of her own circumstances. She had turned to dark magic as a way of coping with the pain and suffering that she had experienced, and had inadvertently opened herself up to demonic possession. Through her research, Emily also learned about the importance of forgiveness and redemption. She realized that even those who had made mistakes and caused pain could find a way to make amends and find peace. In the end, Emily's journey led her to a place of healing and redemption. She had confronted the demons of her past and had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. She knew that her work was not done, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Emily continued her research into her family's past, she began to uncover more and more dark secrets. She found evidence of rituals and sacrifices, and learned of the terrible consequences that came with dabbling in the dark arts. Despite the dangers, Emily was driven by her thirst for knowledge. She felt that it was her duty to uncover the truth about her family's past, and to understand the forces that had plagued her for so long. But as she delved deeper into her research, Emily began to notice strange things happening around her. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut without warning, and she could hear whispers and voices in the darkness. At first, Emily tried to dismiss these occurrences as mere coincidences or tricks of the mind. But as they continued to happen with increasing frequency, she began to fear that something far more sinister was at work. One night, as Emily sat alone in her apartment, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She turned around to find herself face to face with the demon that had possessed her months earlier. The demon taunted her, telling her that she had not learned her lesson and that she was foolish to continue her research. It warned her that the more she learned, the more she would become a target for dark forces. Emily was terrified, but she refused to give up her quest for knowledge. She knew that there were others out there who, like her great-grandmother, were in danger of falling victim to the same forces. Determined to warn others of the dangers of dark magic and demonic possession, Emily began to write about her experiences. She published articles and gave interviews, warning others of the risks involved in dabbling in the dark arts. She also began to work with local occult groups, offering her knowledge and experience as a cautionary tale. She hoped that by sharing her story, she could help others to avoid the same mistakes that she had made. But even as she worked to help others, Emily knew that she was not entirely safe. The demon continued to haunt her, lurking in the shadows and waiting for an opportunity to strike. Emily knew that the only way to truly protect herself was to continue her work, to shine a light on the darkness that had plagued her family for generations. She vowed to never give up her search for knowledge, but also to never forget the price that came with it. In the end, Emily's warning became a beacon of hope for those who had been touched by dark magic and demonic possession. Her story served as a reminder that even the most terrible mistakes could be redeemed, and that even in the face of darkness, there was always hope.